Hey everyone, just a quick wrap up after class on Wednesday. When we stopped, we were talking about comparative advantage and gains from trade. And so we talked about consuming outside of your PPF, that through specialization and trade, we could consume outside of our PPF. And I think I left you with the idea that if we had to produce our own clothing and all of our own food and build our own homes, that we would live in pretty primitive conditions. So there's one last thing that I want to talk about here. And it's sort of an aside, but not exactly. So if you have two people, we had Hill and Bill, we had Rooney and Rayleigh. So let's make them Al and Bob. And if Al and Bob are backyard neighbors and they trade over the fence, we can say, well, look, they can both consume outside of their PPF, right? So if Bob has some PPF and looks at these two things, let's see, Al and Bob, that's A and B. We'll just use two other things, which I'll generically C and D. And so if there's some PPF for Bob, and then maybe Al has something very similar, but the beauty of specialization in a trade is that maybe Al can consume out here, even though that is not something he could produce for himself. So by trading over the backyard fence, that's all cool. We can see how that could benefit both Al and Bob, and they can live in nicer houses and have better food and wear nicer clothes and have lots of electronics and things that they would never produce themselves. So that's the case if they are backyard neighbors. What if one of them lives in Parenton and one of them lives in Penfield? Does that change anything? All right, they can still trade. It doesn't matter if they live in different jurisdictions. Now, what if one of them lives in Ontario County and one of them lives in Wayne County? Does that somehow change the nature of trade, the benefits from trade? No. Well, what if one of them lives in New York and one of them lives in Pennsylvania? Does that change the nature of trade? If they specialize in the thing in which they have a comparative advantage and they trade, is there any difference there? No. At some point, the transportation costs, right, the transaction costs of making the trade become greater than they were than maybe trading over the backyard fence. And so the benefits of trade have to be large enough to offset those transaction costs, right? The logistical costs of actually making the deal and moving the goods or services, right, from one place to another. But as long as the gains from trade are greater than that, it's still worthwhile. They can still both be better off. They can still both consume outside of their PPF. That reminds me of one of my favorite Super Bowl commercials of all time. And so if you have a minute and you want to look this up, it's one that Eminem did for Chrysler, and it's set in Detroit. It's actually for the Chrysler 200, I think. So if you were to Google Eminem Super Bowl commercial Chrysler, you would find it. It's from, 4 or 5 years ago. It's got really great music, these great scenes from Detroit. It portrays Detroit as this gritty, hardworking city. And then at the end, my favorite part of that whole commercial is at the very, very end when all the talking is done and there's a black screen, and then it says in white letters on that black screen, imported from Detroit. It's talking about this particular car. And that's what I think is so cool, because people see the advantages of trade, right? Across county lines, even across state lines. We buy cars that are imported from Detroit. You don't see a lot of people in Rochester or in Western New York who say, you got to buy local cars, right? Buy the cars that are made right here in Western New York. Right? Buy the cars from Buffalo. Buy the cars from Rochester. We don't make cars here. And there are a lot of people who are okay with importing them from Detroit. But then here's my question then. Is there any difference between importing cars from Detroit, importing cars, from here to, where are we, by this lake here, versus importing cars, that come from someone that come from Japan, right? Or from Korea, or from Germany. Right now, I guess my map goes the wrong way because we probably would import them this direction, right? They'd probably come into LA and then somehow get shipped up to here. But is there any real difference between importing cars, trade across international boundaries? And what if you don't have to go so far? I mean, the transaction costs are higher there, but what about trade with Mexico or trade with Canada or trade with Europe? Right? As long as there's enough gains to offset the transaction costs, right, the logistical costs of moving the goods, then fundamentally the benefits from trade are very much the same. But a lot of people treat it differently. And so maybe people in your family, maybe other people treat international trade very, very differently. They don't say, let's buy cars made right here in New York, but they may have a preference, or a very, very strong belief that we should buy American cars. And that raises one other interesting question. Which are the American cars? Usually when people say that, the domestics are Ford, Chrysler, GM products. But the truth is that some of those GM products and those Ford and Chrysler products are assembled in Canada or Mexico. And they use parts that come from all around the world. And some of those Toyotas and Hondas are assembled right in the United States. And they may have parts that are sourced internationally, but sometimes as much as 85-90% of the car and its assembly happens in the US. So it's, I think, more complicated about which one is the, quote, American car and which one is not. And then when you look at ownership of the company, those are publicly traded companies. So you can have people from all around the world owning stock in any of those large car manufacturing companies. And then on top of that is still the question, is there fundamentally a difference between buying a car that was assembled by someone I don't know in South Korea versus someone I don't know in Michigan or Tennessee or Alabama? So that's just something to wrestle with. Hang on to that back whenever we are having large family gatherings and everyone gets together. Let's hope that by Thanksgiving of this year, life has returned to something closer to normal. So when your family is all together and getting along and everything is great, this is a good topic to bring up just to stir the pot, because usually we can find somebody who has very strong views about, buying American. I just like to push you guys to think about it and say, all right, well, what is the reason that is better, and why, and how do I know which one is if you want to do that, then how do you even know which one is the American car, which one is better to buy? Because at some level, is trading across that line really any different than trading across the county line or the state line or the backyard fence? So that's the challenge. That was the main point I wanted to make. There are here are a couple other things that I picked up off of social media a couple years ago. There were some people who were sharing this, never use a self-checkout because they kill jobs. We don't have to self-checkout if you don't want, but it's kind of a specialization thing, right? There are people who have jobs making and installing and maintaining, that equipment, and then fewer people have jobs, with the, actually checking you out. We scanning your goods, charging you the money. We have the same thing right now on the Thruway, right? The Thruway has just moved to automatic tolling, or a few months ago. So now you have to use E-ZPass or you get a bill in the mail. There's no one standing there handing out a ticket and making change and collecting money. And some people were, very concerned and said, well, this is terrible. These are good state, benefits and pensions, and these are good jobs, and we're taking them away. It's also, there's a concept that we talk about in macro called creative destruction, where new innovations sometimes spell the end of old ways of doing things. And so, I don't know that we want to give up our cell phones, but, the use of cell phones makes reliance on the regular phone network, less important. And self-dialing phones that you could dial yourself, meant that fewer people were needed to be operators. Back when there were switchboard operators and you picked up the phone, this is before even my time, and you said, I'm trying to reach someone in Webster, and then they connected you to Webster, and you told the operator who you're trying to reach, and they connected the wire. I mean, those jobs are gone too. So there's a lot of changes.